Hi, it's Deb Solomon. I'm going to read to you today on this beautiful sunny spring day in California. It's also eclipse day, and although we only got to see a small amount of it in our sun, with a little, it looked like a bite out of it, it was still exciting. And hopefully I'm going to have some great pictures to share with my newsletter readers from our friends Fred and Colleen, who traveled to Texas to partake of this. Ended up being eclipse chasers because where they were at was cloudy. So I can't wait to see the pictures, and I'm really excited to share them with you. But today I'm going to read to you from this book. It's called Prince Charming Undercover. It's the first book in my Going All In on Love in Las Vegas series and box set. It's actually a longer, like, women's fiction size book. It has a lot of backstory and your introduction of my hero, this hero and heroine in this book. Also she's one of 4 sisters, and get a little bit of their whole family dynamic in this book, which helps make sense of the rest of the books too, although they can be read by themselves. But this one, I loved writing this. I loved researching it, and I'm going to read you a passage that's actually in Yetta, who is my heroine's mother. It's in her point of view. And she's really the key to getting this whole story started. Her dreams foretold or forecasted some terrible things coming, and she reached out to bring in a young man from who had gotten lost from their family to help fix things. Yetta inhaled deeply. For her, every breath was a gift. She'd struggled with breathing problems all of her life. As a child, her frequent colds and debilitating coughs had been shrouded with whispers and looks she didn't understand until she turned 10. Then her mother told her the story of the fire that had cost their family so dearly. One daughter killed, one deformed, and destined to die young. Yetta's life had been spared, but her lungs had been permanently damaged. Over the years, Yetta had slowly unraveled the threads of the story. An accident, for sure, but the person who'd shouldered the blame for it was Jarek Cerna, who had been just a child himself at the time. It broke her heart to think about the injustice done to him. Now she had Jarek's son in front of her, Nicolai, the person who would help her rid the family of a threat. But Nicolai was more than that. He was the only one who could bring peace to a man Yetta had long since forgiven, a man who believed he was dying. Would you like me to tell you about your father? The question obviously annoyed him. I know my father. He's alive and well and recently retired from the police force. They were sitting at Yetta's patio table, protected from the sun by a large canvas umbrella that Nick had unfurled for her. Nice manners, she thought, but no trust, none whatsoever. Everyone was a suspect, including her, which meant Yetta would need to move slowly to build a connection between Nicolai and the very distant past. You have questions for me about Charles, then? The change of topic seemed to surprise him, but he shifted positions on the lawn chair and faced her, resting his elbows on the glass-topped table. How long have you known him? Oh, goodness, 20 years at least. His blue eyes reminded her so much of his mother. Beautiful, sweet, reckless Lucille. But there was a wariness of Jurek, too. Jurek, who never took anything at face value, including Yetta's love for him and his family. Kingston was forever bringing home wounded souls, like a child brings a bird with a broken wing. How'd they meet? Through work. Charles was a young and up-and-coming attorney with a firm that represented the casino where Kingston worked. This was during a very turbulent time when unions were making a push for inclusion in the gaming industry. Yetta could see him mentally comparing what she told him to what he'd undoubtedly read about in some file. What do you know about his past, his family? Very little. Charles has never been particularly forthcoming about his childhood. I've gathered he had a bit of a rough time. Kingston told me his father died when Charles was quite young. His mother remarried and had another child, a girl, later on, who paid for law school. I have no idea, but Charles is a very smart man, cagey even. He knows how to work the system, and he is most astute when it comes to making the right connections. She watched him mentally digest that truth. How did your husband figure into this? That is a very good question. At first, I thought Kingston brought Charles home to introduce him to our daughters. Alexa and Elizabeth were both beautiful, eligible young women, but it became immediately apparent that Charles was more interested in Kingston's connections in the industry than his family. She sighed without meaning to. In hindsight, I wonder if I imbued him with too much humanity. What did your husband get out of the relationship? She could almost hear Kingston chuckling. He's a smart one, Yetta. You may have gotten more than you bargained for when you invited him here. Or was that her imagination talking? She fought back the sadness that she'd fallen prey to after Kingston's passing. In her youth, Yetta had trusted the voices in her head, the visions that came to her. Her gift had set her apart, made her special. Kingston had revered her, called her his goddess, but after his stroke, the sight had failed her. She no longer trusted her instincts, which was one reason she'd asked Jurek for help. And he directed her to this man, whom she didn't know, but to whom she had an overwhelming connection. And she alone knew why that was. Perhaps it was time to share her secret. I was the third person to hold you when you were a baby. Now, about Charles's connection to your daughter. Your parents were renting a little mobile home on the Mojave. I remember because Jurek always called it Mojave with a hard J. He was teasing, of course. Nicolai didn't appear interested, but she sensed that was a front. Your mother was working in a stage review before she started the show. A stage review? Is that another name for striptease? His snide tone made her angry. No. She worked a razzle-dazzle show once, right after she moved here, but this was modern dance, full of passion and grit. One reviewer said your mother danced with her heart, not with her feet. He still looked unconvinced. Dancers don't get pregnant and have babies. That is true of many, I'm sure. And I will admit your mother wasn't thrilled when she found out that she was expecting. But your father was over the moon. He was quite a bit older than your mother and so very much in love. He thought your birth would make Lucy give up her dream of being a dancer. Obviously, he was wrong. A statement, not a question. Lucy tried to be a stay-at-home wife and mother, as was expected of her at the time, but the urge to dance was just too strong. She started doing exercises and fasting to get back into shape. Alexandra was just 7 months old when you were born. I love babies, and since I was home anyway, I offered to babysit. What was one more? Uh, Double the work? His dry humor made her smile. Double the treasure. You were a perfect baby. Alexandra was as imperial as her name. From the very beginning, she seemed to assume the rest of us were there to serve her, she said, smiling at the memory of holding her firstborn. But you were a gift. I doubt that. Don't. You see, I came from a family that put boys on pedestals. My brothers were young gods. My sisters and I, well, it was different for girls. It's possible I was suffering from a little postpartum depression because I hadn't given my husband a son, even though Kingston worshipped his daughters and always insisted that he preferred girls. You're my queen, and you've given us a princess, my darling. What more in this world could one man ask, he'd said after every birth. And I meant every word, Yetta love. She swallowed against the tightness in her throat and continued. Kingston and I were childless for a long time. I suffered from the same problem Alexandra inherited. I was truly grateful for her, but in all honesty, I was disappointed too. I wasn't certain I'd ever be able to get pregnant again, you see. So when you came along, I could pretend that you were mine, that I'd had twins. I didn't love Alexandra less. She wouldn't have allowed it, she added. But I had you too, to feel fulfilled and complete, which is why she couldn't say it even after all these years. Why what? Why I did what I did. His eyes narrowed. What did you do? I nursed you. I was sick. She shook her head and looked at her hands in her lap. No, you were healthy, but you weren't gaining weight like most babies do. Your formula didn't agree with you. You'd spit it up every time I tried to feed you, so I gave up trying. I had more milk than Alexandra could take, so I put you to my breast. He seemed surprised, but not repulsed. Really? Yetta took a deep breath and let it out. I never told anyone, even my husband. I was afraid it would seem wrong, that someone might say I was slighting my child in favor of another, a boy child. I might have even thought that myself, but you were so happy when we nursed. Alexa, she ate because it was time. You, because you needed me. She reached for his hand, and I needed you. Why? You helped me get over the blues. I only had you for 6 or 7 months. Then your father lost his job. Although it was unheard of at the time, he became a stay-at-home father. You let me go. I had no choice. I was pregnant again, to my profound shock and my husband's profound delight. I meant after my mother died. Why didn't anyone come for you? He nodded. I did, but it was too late. Jurek went into some place no one could reach him after your mother died. Emotionally, I mean. He was in jail for another 4 months, and the whole time he wouldn't talk to anyone. She pictured her cousin when she'd visited him in jail. He'd reminded her of photos she'd seen of prisoners of war, hollow cheeks and dead eyes. I know he's never forgiven himself for what happened, she said. Lucy didn't drive, and he'd been picked up for writing a bad check, so she had to take the bus to work. She just stepped out the door of the bus when some crazy guy ran a light, broadsided another car that struck her. Yetta remembered feeling overwhelmed by shock and sadness when she learned of the tragedy. I was back east, visiting my parents when it happened, By the time I heard the news, you were gone. Jurek ordered me not to search for you, but I did anyway. Maybe because you'd been adopted by a policeman, the authorities were more tight-lipped than usual. It wasn't until last week that I even knew Jurek had maintained a connection to you. Why didn't he ever contact me? He said you were with a good family. You seemed well-adjusted and safe, she sighed. Maybe he was afraid you'd hate him, and perhaps you do. But one thing I know for certain, the past is part of you. And whether you want to admit it or not, you owe it to yourself to meet your father. He isn't my father. She didn't argue. He was right. She wasn't his mother either. She got up. Nap time should be over at the Dancing Hippo, and I need to pick up Maya. That little squirt brought me back to life, just as you did once. Babies are good for the soul. He didn't refute the statement, but Yetta could tell he didn't believe her. He would, someday. She'd seen it in his future, but she didn't tell him that. Hope you enjoyed that and might check it out. I just put brand new, sparkly, fun spring covers on my on the box set. Going all in for love.